What you're seeing in this video is a clip from my live stream that I do on Mondays at 7 p.m. Eastern Time on the OBR's YouTube channel. It's a show I call Quincy Carrier Live. So if you want to catch me live on Mondays during the football season, make sure you subscribe to the OBR's YouTube channel. Me and them are doing a collaboration for this year, and I'm going to be live Mondays at 7 p.m. on the OBR. Now, let's get into kind of the meat and potatoes of what was proven in that game. And a lot of people, while it was happening, or at least some people while it was happening, really wanted to downplay the impact of how bad Deshaun Watson's play was and how much that was hurting the team. I don't think there was a lot of people who would be willing to admit that, like, Deshaun Watson was good in 2024 at least. But I do think there were a lot of people who thought that talk about how much Deshaun is affecting the team was a bit overblown, that people were focusing on it too much, that there were other issues to focus on outside of the quarterback position, and that if you change quarterbacks, it wasn't going to completely transform what this team looked like. Right? I heard a lot of arguments. It's not just him. Any quarterback would look bad behind this offensive line. I saw the comments, oh, it's not just him. I mean, look how garbage these wide receivers are. It's not just him. There's no run game, right? It's the play caller, or it's Ken Dorsey's fault, ironically enough, because Ken Dorsey now gets the play sheet, and now people are acting like that's the solution. The reality of what the problem had been for the first 7 games of the season, it smacked everybody in the face. It's simple. A lot of it, not all of it, a lot of it was just Deshaun Watson. It's really that simple. They went from a team that could not beat the New York Giants to a team that beat the Baltimore Ravens and one position changed. They didn't fire the coach. They didn't scrap the entire offensive philosophy. They lost the wide receiver from the Giants game to now. They lost the wide receiver. And yet they looked exponentially better. What changed? Some people wanted me to just criticize the offensive line as if they are an equal percentage of the problem as Watson. And my whole point, while he was out there, was like, hey, we cannot act like Watson is simply a factor in what's going on with this offense. He's the driving force of why this offense is bad. He plays the quarterback position. We usually understand this concept when the quarterback plays well. But that quarterback starts playing bad, and all of a sudden, it's like the quarterback's not the most important player on the field anymore. That quarterback starts playing bad, all of a sudden, left tackle's just as important as quarterback. The wide receivers is just as important as quarterback. But when the quarterback's playing well, we all understand, hey, that guy can change and transform a mediocre unit into a great one. And that's a two-way street. You could be so bad that you could turn a good unit into a mediocre one. That reality smacked everybody in the face when Jameis Winston got out there and got over 300 yards, almost scored 30 points against the Baltimore Ravens. And you didn't even need the points to confirm it. We knew this was the case in the first half when the Browns had 6 points. The Browns were just moving the ball up and down the field. So much easier. Remember when people were talking about how the wide receivers have low miles per hour and they don't get much separation, and we were talking about these mile per hour numbers and these separation stats? Y'all remember that? We talk about stats like that, but we don't talk about enough how those stats are measured and how flawed it is to talk about those stats without understanding how those stats are measured. Again, We talk a lot about stats when we talk about football these days online, but I don't think we talk enough about understanding what a stat is before we just start spouting it out. We love when something tells us something's in the top 10. We don't be understanding what that stat is, though. We just go, it's top 10. And those two stats, miles per hour and separation, are a peak example of the fact that we don't understand these stats that we be throwing in these articles all the time. Miles per hour, right? It sounds like, okay, that's measuring how fast wide receivers are. But it's really not. What miles per hour measures when they're doing it for next-gen stats is how fast is a wide receiver running when targeted. And that's a key piece to this. Because how fast the player runs when they're targeted is greatly determined on where in the field are they targeted. We pointed this out earlier. Deshaun Watson, 65% of his passes between 10 yards and behind the line of scrimmage. You're not going to get the full speed in 10 yards. You're not going to have high miles per hour when you're running those shallow routes. The Browns weren't targeting the parts of the field where you would run the fastest, so you weren't having the fastest miles per hour number. If you understand that stat, you get what that stat is telling you. It's telling you where the Browns are targeting and if you're getting the most, because you should assume that some of these guys run 4.3, right? Elijah Moore runs 4.3. Cedric Tillman runs 4.4. Amari Cooper, I think he's somewhere around 4.6, right? The Browns wide receivers weren't physically slow. We've seen their 40 times. But why was the miles per hour low? We never asked that question. We just saw Browns low miles per hour. Oh, they must be slow. Because we don't understand what that stat is measuring and how that stat is measured. Another example is separation. A lot of people will tell you about separation stats. Do they actually understand how separation is measured? A lot of separation and how separation is measured is about ball placement. If you throw a ball behind a wide receiver and by the time they get their hands on it or their hands in a position to catch, they have to turn back towards the DB, you know what that's going to affect? That's going to affect separation. That's not really a reflection of if the wide receiver is getting open. This all goes back to something that I always say, you can't read football, you gotta watch it. Because if you try to read it and tell me all these separation stats and things like that, you're missing some of the key context. Hey, the separation numbers look like that because the balls weren't on target. Hey, the miles per hour looks like that because these balls are not being thrown downfield at all. You're not giving these guys a chance to run at full speed. A lot of people thought that I was simplifying the Browns' issues by just talking about how the quarterback is affecting. Was Deshaun Watson the only thing that wasn't going well with the Cleveland Browns in 2024 in the first 7 weeks? No. The offensive line had issues. The wide receivers had issues catching the ball consistently. There were other problems. The defense wasn't playing the most consistent football until the Philadelphia game. There were other problems going on with the Cleveland Browns, but we had to be honest about it. Most of this was being exacerbated by Deshaun Watson. Yeah, is the offensive line great? No. But was the offensive line also having their problems be accelerated by how Deshaun Watson plays in the pocket? Yes. And you know how I could tell this is the case? All it took was Jameis Winston to get in there. 2 sacks. 2 sacks. They gave up 2 sacks. It's not like they had world beater performance. I think as an offensive line pass blocking, they had a 68 grade, which granted is the highest grade that they've had this year, but it's not a high grade in the context of what other teams are scoring on that. It's pretty mid-grade. Wasn't like the offensive line turned into the 2021. It's just their job got easier because the quarterback's not putting them in a tougher spot. Deshaun Watson put them in a tougher spot. Our yards per average, a lot of people blame that on Kevin Stefanski and Ken Dorsey. Turns out, if Deshaun doesn't want to throw in the intermediate part of the field, you're going to have a low yards per target because Jameis gets in there, 8.8 yards per target. It's not because those opportunities weren't there in the when Kevin was calling plays. It's just because Jameis is willing to take them. I think a lot of people blamed everything or thought that all of these things were creating why Deshaun Watson was playing poorly. But the reality was Deshaun Watson was playing especially poor. Were other people playing bad? Yeah, but Deshaun was the only one out there being historically awful in 2024. That's just the truth. He was historically awful this year. And now this guy who just played historically awful football is coming off an Achilles injury. This is why people say pretty unanimously, guy's done. Guy is done. But that was something that's interesting. Again, we saw this week. Wide receivers open. Talked all that about miles per hour. Hey, Cedric Tillman looked pretty fast on Sunday. Jerry Jeudy looked pretty fast on Sunday. Wide receivers didn't look slow. These wide receivers who people said they were slow. All of a sudden, you throw the ball to them downfield, they're moving. Elijah Moore, man, he looks fast. He's out there whipping guys, looking quick. It's interesting. I wonder what changed. Some of these wide receivers, we were complaining about the effort they were getting. One of the things I brought up frequently, hey, these guys don't think they're going to get the ball if they run a route past 7 yards. They've been dealing with this since March. So, yeah, the effort didn't look great. Hey, let me ask you guys in chat. Did the effort look significantly better from all of the wide receivers? Did you see Elijah Moore hot dogging it like he was last week? Or were these wide receivers working because they thought they were convinced that the ball would come to them and they would get a chance to make a play? Hell, Jerry Jeudy wanted to make a play so bad he got a PBU on one pass. All of a sudden, now this wide receiver room that couldn't make a play, they're making plays. Wow, it's almost like somebody's giving them an opportunity to make those plays. Talked about the offensive line. Wyatt Teller coming back's a big deal for him. I got to see the film on DeJuan Jones because I'm hearing conflicting things about if DeJuan Jones actually did play well at left tackle. But he wasn't noticeable out there. Jameis did a good job of protecting him. I want to talk about sack numbers for a second here because we always make this mistake of talking about sack numbers as if they only have to do with the offensive line. But I'm going to tell you right here, and I don't know if I'm the first person to tell you this. I hope I'm not. Sack numbers tend to be more consistent with quarterbacks than offensive lines. Did you know that? Let's take two examples. Baker Mayfield, Deshaun Watson, two quarterbacks the city loves to talk about. Baker Mayfield has been in the top 10 in most sacks taken his entire career. That's been on bad offensive lines like 2018 and 2019. He was in the top 10. On good offensive lines like 2020 and 2021, he still was in the top 10. Medium offensive lines and then back to good offensive lines. He's always been in the top 10 in sacks allowed, with sacks taken. You know who else has been in the top 10? Deshaun Watson, Joe Burrow. It's interesting, right? It's almost like sacks are a reflection of a play style at quarterback, more so than a quarterback's offensive line. Because if Baker Mayfield has played with good offensive lines and bad offensive lines and still have maintained to be in the top 10, I think the only year Baker Mayfield was not in the top 10 was 2020, where the Browns had the best offensive line on earth, and he was still like 16th in the NFL. If you're a quarterback and you have a high propensity to get sacked, you're probably going to have a high propensity to get sacked because it's not really about the offensive line play that gets you sacked. Deshaun Watson, some of his sacks weren't his fault, but a good amount of them, he's rolling out. He's holding the ball longer than he needs to. He's not getting the ball out on time. He takes a sack. Some of the times, he's not seeing what the team's doing. He's not predicting it, so he doesn't see the blitz coming. He just holds the ball, gets hit right into a blitz. Blitz. Got to understand some of these stats that we be throwing out there. Deshaun Watson, Baker Mayfield, look through their whole career. Pressure to sack numbers are pretty stable. Sack numbers are pretty stable. Is what it is. They just are like that as players. It's their play style that gets them in trouble. Another one, like Joe Flacco played behind a bad offensive line last year. He didn't take a ton of sacks. Why is that? Joe Flacco doesn't play a style that means he takes sacks. Same thing with Jameis Winston. Jameis, especially since he's gotten to New Orleans, has been really good at just climbing the pocket. We saw that today. It was a Sunday. Jameis climbing the pocket. Jameis getting the ball out. And this is another thing that I want to point to. Jameis Winston is really good at not just getting the ball out quickly, but getting the ball out on time. As much as we can complain about Watson holding on to the ball too long, I can show you a quarterback, and you guys are all aware of a quarterback who gets rid of the ball quickly, but not on time. That's DTR. DTR gets rid of the ball too quick. Right? Like he'll just throw the ball quick. Nothing's developed yet, or safeties hasn't been moved the way they need to be moved, and he kind of blows the play up. You can be too fast as a quarterback. You can be too slow as a quarterback. Being on time is exactly that, being on time. And sometimes being on time means getting rid of the ball quickly. Sometimes being on time means holding on for the ball for an extra quarter second. Jameis has a better knack for that than Deshaun does and than DTR does. Jameis has a better understanding of the flow of a play. It makes sense. He's the most experienced quarterback on the roster. Gets the ball out on time. He understands NFL offenses better, and he understands NFL defenses better. Did you see Jameis not really struggle against the blitz in the way that Deshaun did? Again, it wasn't play calling that made that happen. It wasn't a change in the offense. Jameis was able to identify it. He saw the zero coming. He saw where it was coming from. I think he did a great job on that last drive. It was a 3rd and 8. They pretty much put 9 guys on the line of scrimmage. I've been begging the Browns quarterback to do this all year. 9 guys on the line of scrimmage. Jameis sees it coming. It's 3rd and 9. And he gets to the top step and he throws the out. Bam. Nothing they could do about it. Because he saw it coming. He took advantage of it. And he got the first down. That's any other quarterback. We're complaining about the offensive line stinking. It was never about that. The quarterback has the ability to minimize damage because they're in charge of so much. Because they get to determine so much. Because they have so many options on every play of what they could or could not do. They can make you worse and they can make you better. But we have to remember that that's going to be the quarterback's responsibility. Now, another thing I want to get to, because I'm being really positive about Jameis Winston. I think he deserves it after his performance this week. But I think we all need to understand here with Jameis, it's going to be a ride. It's going to be a roller coaster. And at some point, you're going to be furious at Jameis. This is how it works with Jameis. There are going to be games where Jameis Winston could throw for 400-plus yards. He's done it twice. Back-to-back, I believe, in his career. Jameis could throw for 5 touchdowns in the game. Jameis can put up crazy numbers. He might also throw for 3 interceptions in a game. I think everybody who loves the Browns, whether you play for them, whether you watch them, should understand that about Jameis. If we understand that about Jameis Winston, we will continue to have a good time. Now, what you don't want to do is fall into the trap of being the 10,000th person that looks at Jameis's skills, sees how smart he can be at times, sees that arm talent, thinks to themselves, I can fix him. Jameis Winston has put in an incredible amount of work to be at the place that he is right now because he's not as turnover prone as he used to be. But keep in mind, look how many times he almost turned that ball over Sunday. This is a man who has shown great improvement. Like, he still almost turned the ball over 3 times. We just got to understand and accept that, man. Jameis is not going to be your franchise quarterback, but he could be your franchise quarterback, right? We can have fun with Jameis, but he ain't a franchise quarterback. It is what it is. The Browns' focus should still be on the next 2 draft classes at the quarterback position. Jameis is going to be Jameis. That means he's a bridge. That means he's a fun quarterback, but we should always keep that in mind because I don't want people to build this up to a point and then when Jameis does what Jameis does, which is throw like 1 touchdown, 3 interceptions in a game, we all acting like we got Khan. Like we can't do that. We know what Jameis is going to do, and that means he might turn it over. He might ball out. He's one of the few backups in the NFL, and I think probably the only backup in the NFL that's capable of playing at as high as a level as he can. But he's also one of the few backups in the NFL that's capable of just completely blowing the game up, right? Like, that's just how it's going to be with Jameis. And if we accept that, I think we'll be okay during this experience.